So you're trying to add a recycler view into your app. Well, I think you've come to the right place. What I'm going to do in this video is show you everything you need to know about the recycler view. Things like how to add in your rows, how to customize each of the rows so they match the theme of your app, along with what each of the methods are doing in the adapter class, and just a smidge bit of what the recycler view is doing in the background. I think this video is going to help a ton of you out, so let's get started. Alright, so in this video, we're going to be making a recycler view that looks very similar to this. Now, before you even start working on your recycler view, the very first thing you should probably do is figure out how you're going to grab your data, whether that be from a database, you're uploading files to your project, or just creating string arrays in the string.xml file. If you want to follow along with this video, what we're going to be using are a few vector assets and 3 strings for each of our rows. So to add in the vector assets, all you have to do is come over to the far left, expand the resources folder, come down to drawable, and then within here, what we need to do is add in those vector assets. Now, I already have all the vector assets that we're going to be using for this video, but to add in some vector assets, all you have to do is right-click on drawable, come down to new, and then click on vector assets. This window should open up, come over to clip art, and then you should see this little clip art section right here. Click on this little image, and you should be able to add in a bunch of different vectors. Now, I have 20 for the 20 essential amino acids. You can add in as many of them as you want, but I would say you're going to need at least 10 of them. So come through, pick 10 of these, and you should be good to go there. Then the next thing that we're going to do is come over to values and then double click on strings.xml file. And again, I already have all the strings added in. So create a few string arrays for each of your rows. So I have 3, the name of the molecule, the 3-letter abbreviation, along with the 1-letter abbreviation. Once you have all of your data set up, the next thing we're going to do is come over and actually add in the recycler view to one of our activities. So in my case, it's going to be the activity main.xml file. You can add it to whatever activity you want to. I have this little hello world text here. I'm going to delete it. So the recycler view is in the common tab for our palette. So I'm going to go over to the left here, common recycler view, and I'm just going to drag it onto our layout. In terms of constraints, I'm just going to constrain it to each of the sides of the parent view. So once you have your constraints for your recycler view, we're going to give it an ID. So come over to the attributes panel towards the far right. And then at this topmost bar right here, it says ID. We're going to give it an ID. I'm going to call it M recycler view for my recycler view. Hit enter, and then we should be good to go for our recycler view. Okay, so now that we have our recycler view kind of set up, what we're going to do now is make a base layout for our rows. So to do this, let's come back over to the far left, and then in our resources folder, we're going to come down to layout, and then we're going to right click on it, come down to new layout resource file, and then I'm just going to call this recycler view row. And then hit enter, and we should be presented with a new XML file. So within here, I'm going to add in a few things that you should probably add in each time you're creating a new recycler view. And then after that, you're free to go off on your own and make your own layout. So the first thing I always like doing is adding in a card view. So if we come back over to the palette in the container section, you're looking for this guy right here, CardView. So take it, drag it into the layout, and then the next thing I'm going to do is add constraints to the sides of the parent. Once you have the constraints for the card view, it should be centered towards the middle of the layout, and then we're going to add another constraint layout within the card view. So drag that in here, and we should have a constraint layout there. And then within this new constraint layout, what we're going to want to do is add in views to hold all the data we want displayed in each of our rows. If you take a look at the example here, we're going to want 4 views, an image view and 3 text views here. So the first view I'm going to add in is the image view. So let's come over to common image view. I'm going to come down to the component tree because I think it's a little bit easier to drag all these views into the second constraint layout. And for this one, I'm just going to give it a default of arginine. So we should have this, and then I'm going to throw in 3 more text views. So by the end of this, you should have a component tree that looks very similar to this. I would say you can veer off and make your own layout once you add in this card view and constraint layout. So I'm going to go ahead, rearrange these views, and then I'll explain what I did once I get back. Okay, so I finally have the layout for our recycler view row all set up. So what I did was I took the image view, moved it over to the left, gave a constraint to the top, bottom, and left of our constraint layout. And then I took the text view, put it above, constraints to the image view and the top part of our constraint layout, and then I took these two text views and then put them below the name. So what I'm going to do now is go ahead and change the style for each of these views, and then I'll come back. All right, so I have the overall style for our row completed. So here's what I did. I have the card view here, and then these are all the extra attributes that I gave. So I set a few margins here. I gave it a background color of blue-black. Now, where did I get that from? I added in these two additional colors within the colors.xml file. Add those in if you want to use the same colors as me, but back to the row. I also gave it a corner radius of 20 dp and an elevation of 8 dp. And then for our image view, what I did was added in a tint to the molecule, so I gave it a tint of tan accent. And then for our text view, I made the text bold, changed the size and the color, and the same thing for these text views as well. So our RecyclerView row, the base theme is done. Now I'm gonna specifically leave out one last thing we have to do for our row so you can see what happens when we fail to do this step. Now I'm being very vague with this, but you'll see what I mean later in the video. For now, what we're gonna do is create a model class for our data. So this is just a class that's going to contain all the data. It's going to make our code much less cluttered and more readable, which is always a plus. So let's come over to the far left, and you're going to come down to this folder right here. Now it's probably named something different, but it's the folder that's holding your main activity class. So we're going to right click on it, come down to new, and we're going to create a new Java class. I'm going to call mine amino acid model, but you could call it something different. So if you're doing like the planets, I would call it planet model. And then once you have a name for it, hit enter, and then we're going to hit enter again. And you should be presented with something that looks very similar to this. So then within our model class, what we want to do is create variables that's going to hold all the data that represents one of our items. So in my case, the amino acid, I'm going to have strings for the abbreviations, the name, and I'm going to have an integer that's going to hold the vector image. So if you're doing the planets again, maybe you have a string for the name and you have an integer for the distance away from the sun, maybe the diameter of the planet. Whatever it is, you're going to create variables to store all that data. So I'm going to go ahead and do that really quick. So I have all the variables created that's going to hold the data for my amino acid. The next thing we should do is create our constructor. Now, a cool thing about Android Studio is that it could create the constructor for us. So let's double click this, right click on it, come down to generate, and then we're just going to click on constructor. Make sure you select all the variables that you created, and then we're just going to click OK. And then I'm going to enter this over so it's not going off the screen. And then we should have our constructor created for all of our variables. The next thing we're going to do is create getters for each of our strings. We don't need setters, but we do need the getters here. So it's the same process as creating the constructor, and we should be good to go for our model class. So now that we have our model class done, what we're going to do is come back over to the mainActivity.java file, and we're actually going to create a bunch of models, and we're going to store them within an array list. So let's come outside of the onCreate method in our main activity, and we're going to type in array list, and it's going to be of type amino acid model, or if you created the planets again, it would be of type planet model. And then I'm just going to call this amino acid models, set that equal to a new array list. So this list is going to hold all the models, and then we'll send that over to our RecyclerView adapter later on. Now, outside of the onCreate, but below it, I'm going to create a private method. So I'm going to call it private void setup amino acid models. So then within here, what we need to do is create all the model classes for each of our items. So in my case, I have a few string arrays in the strings.xml file. I need to pull each of these out and store them within an array within our main activity. So I'm going to go ahead and do this. So we're going to type in string array. I'm going to call this amino acid names. And then I'm going to set this equal to a get resources dot get string array. And then all I have to do is pass in the ID. So it's r.array dot amino acid full text, which is my names. And then I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing for the abbreviations. So now I've grabbed all the string arrays that I have in the strings.xml file. And what we should do now is loop through each of these arrays and then create our model based on what iteration we're in on the for loop. So let's go for int I is equal to 0. And then we're going to say while I is less than the amino acid names dot length, and then we'll just do an I++. Now the reason we can do this is because each of these should be of equal length. And then all we have to do is type in the amino acid models dot add, and then we're going to create a new amino acid model, and then we have to pass in all of our data. So it's going to be the amino acid names. We're going to have the amino acid abbreviation. This is the 3-letter one. We're going to have the amino acid small abbreviation, so the 1 letter, and then I forgot to set up the array list for our images. So if we come back up to the top, below our amino acid model array list, I'm going to type in an int array. We're going to call this the amino acid images. And I'm going to set this equal to, and to grab each of our images, we just go r.drawable.your image that you want. So here's the first one. I have alanine, and you're going to want to make sure these are in the same order as the array list in your strings.xml file. So I'm going to go ahead. I already have this written out in another file, so I'm just going to paste that all in. Here's all of my drawables in the correct order. So we're going to come back down, and I'm just going to type in the amino acid images, and then we just need whatever iteration we're on. Okay, so just a quick summary. We grab all of the values from our strings.xml file, then we iterate through each of the amino acids or the items we're going to display to the user, and then we just create a model class for each of those items and store them within our amino acid models up here. All right, so our setup method is all done. Let's add it into the onCreate method. So I'm just going to type in setup amino acid models or whatever you happen to name it. And now that we have this within our onCreate method, what we have to do now is set up the adapter class for our RecyclerView. But before we go ahead and do that, what I want to do is explain a little bit of what the RecyclerView is doing in the background. So while we're setting up our adapter, it makes a little bit more sense. All right, so what do we have here? Let's say that this blue rectangle represents our phone, and then we're going to say that one of these pink rectangles is going to represent the row/item within our RecyclerView. Now, let's say that we had 100 items that we needed to display to the user. The cool thing about the RecyclerView is rather than generating 100 items like what would happen in the list view, the RecyclerView is only going to generate enough items to fit on the user's screen. So in the case of this phone, it's just going to generate 7 of these. And as the user's scrolling, so let's say they're scrolling in this direction here, this item goes off screen, it's going to be scrapped. So let's say it comes over here, and we're going to say this is a scrapped view now because it's no longer on the user's screen. So it'll just sit in this little like garbage pile almost right over here. As the user is scrolling, right, we have an item that goes off screen, but we also have an item that goes on screen, right? So that's going to be this item view right here. And we're going to call this process our binding process. And right here, this is going to be where we're updating all of the data that's on each of these views. So in the case of our example right here, so if I pull up the old RecyclerView, as I'm scrolling here, these views are being recycled, so they're going to come back down around here, and their data is going to be updated with different text. So if this is a little bit confusing, I think as we create the adapter class for a RecyclerView, it's going to clear a ton of things up. So let's go back over to Android Studio and create our adapter class. To make the adapter class, what we're going to do is go over to the far left and then expand the innermost folder within our Java folder right here, so the one holding our mainActivity.java file. We're going to right-click on this, come down to New Java Class, and then you're going to name your RecyclerView adapter. Now, I'm going to call mine AA for amino acid _ RecyclerView adapter. And then I'm just going to hit Enter and hit Enter again. And you should be left with a file very similar to this, but probably a different name. Okay, let's get started with this adapter class. To start off, we're going to do a few very standard things. We're going to extend the RecyclerView.adapter class, and then within angle brackets, what we're going to have to pass in here is the name of our RecyclerView adapter class. So I'm going to copy this, paste it in here, and then we're going to go .myViewHolder. Now, what is this myViewHolder? Well, eventually we're going to define an inner class to our RecyclerView adapter. But before we go ahead and do that, we need to implement a few methods. So if you click on this little error message here, you should see a red light bulb towards the left. Click it, come down to Implement Methods, and you just want to implement all 3 here. Come down, click OK, and you should have this following code added in for you. It might look a little scary. Don't worry about it. Just keep following along. So go past these 3 new implemented methods, and we're going to create this myViewHolder class. So we're going to type in public static. Make sure you make this class static. It has to be static. So public static class, we're going to call it the myViewHolder, and this is going to extend the RecyclerView.viewHolder. And then this class is still a little upset, so if you click it, we get the red light bulb again. Click this, implement the constructor, and we have the basic skeleton for our RecyclerView adapter. All right, so now that we have all these really cool methods, what do they even do? You know, I think that's one big problem that I had when I was first learning about recycler views is no one really explained what was happening in each of these methods. You just kind of followed along, cut and paste, and it's like, oh, it just kind of works. So what I want to do is go through each of these methods and write a little blurb about what they're doing. So in our onCreateViewHolder, this is where we're going to be inflating the layout and giving the look to each of our rows. And the onBindViewHolder, remember there's that word bind, so that binding process. So this is where we're going to be assigning values to each of our rows as they come back onto screen. And that's all going to be dependent on the position of that recycler view. Now, this little method right here, all it really wants to do is just how many items do you have in total? Right, so this is going to help with the onBinding process so it knows what data to update each views. And then finally, we have this inner class that we created, and maybe this is a terrible way of looking at it, but I like thinking of it as our onCreate method. Because within here, what we're going to be doing is grabbing all the views from our recycler view row layout, so these guys right here, and assigning them to variables. And that's pretty similar to what we're doing in our onCreate methods. I think we should start writing our code here because it's very similar to what we're used to doing. So what we have is a few views, right? So if we go back over to the recycler view row layout, we have an image view and 3 text views. So let's go ahead, make a few variables in here. We have the image view. So image view, we'll just call it image view, keep things simple. And then we have our text views as well. So we'll just call it text view name, or maybe I'll make this a little bit shorter. We'll do TV name, we'll do text view 3-letter, and then we'll have the text view 1-letter, right? So this is just going to be our 3-letter abbreviation, the 1-letter abbreviation. And then within the myViewHolder part right here, within here, we're just going to do our image view, set that equal to the item view, right? So that's this right here, dot find view by ID. And then what ID did the image view have? I'm assuming just image view. So I'm going to copy this, come back over, r.id.theImageView. And then I'm going to go ahead and do the same exact thing for our text views, and then I'll be back. Okay, so now I have all of that set up right here. So we grabbed each of our views from our XML file, and we're storing them in a variable within our Java code. Now let's come up to the get item count, and what I like to do is find the length of all the data that we're passing in. So what data are we going to be passing in? We're going to be passing in this amino acid models, right? So let's go ahead and create a constructor for our adapter class. So we can do this by typing in the public amino acid recycler view adapter. And then we're going to need a few things. We're obviously going to need the data, but we're also going to need the context later on. So we're going to take in a context, call it context, and then we're also going to take in an array list of type amino acid models. So I'm just going to copy this. We're going to go this, and I'm just going to call it the amino acid models. And then I'm going to create class variables up here. So I'm going to type in the context, just some really basic stuff, models. And then we're just going to do the usual this.context equals the context. And the same thing for the array list. So now we have all of our data within our recycler view adapter. So let's go back down to the get item count. And all we should do is amino acid models dot size, right? I could do this because I know there's 20 essential amino acids, but hard coding in values is always frowned upon. So it's better doing something like this. So now that we have the item count, what we should do is tell our adapter to update the data on each of our rows. What we need to do is change the value within the holder that's passed in. You can see we have this holder variable here that's of type our inner class, right? So it's of this type, and each of these has our variables that we grabbed from our layout. So what we could do is type in holder dot, right? So if we want to change the name, so I call this text view name. So that's this part right here, this arginine. So if I want to change the value of this text view, all I have to do is holder dot whatever you name that. And then we're going to do a set text since it's a text view. And then we could do the amino acid models dot get the position within our array list dot get we want the amino acid name. So that's why we created this model class. It makes things a little bit more readable. So I could copy this little bit right here because we're going to be using it all the time. So we could do the holder dot let's do the 3-letter abbreviation, set text to this part, and then all we want to do is get the 3-letter abbreviation. So I'm going to go ahead and do this to the rest of the views, and then I'll be back. All right, so I got that all done, and I should mention if you do have an image, we're not going to use the set text, we're going to use the set image resource, and then you're just going to pass in that image. So let's go up to the very last method. Within here, what we need to do is just inflate our layout. So this one right here, our RecyclerView row.xml. So to do this, very simple, we're going to type in layout inflator. We're just going to call this the inflator, set this equal to a layout inflator.from the context, right? So we grab this from our constructor that was given to us. And then we're going to type in view is going to equal the inflator that we just created right here, dot inflate, and then we're just going to pass in the layout that we want to inflate it with. So in our case, it's going to be r.layout.the RecyclerView row. And then we're going to pass in the parent. Where did that come from? Again, it was given to us here, and then we don't want to attach it to the root. So then the very last thing we have to do in this method is, rather than returning null, what we want to do is return a new amino acid RecyclerView Adapter dot my view holder, and then we just want to pass in that view. So that should be everything that you need for the RecyclerView Adapter class. So I'll go over this all again really quick. We set up 2 variables here, a context, which we need for inflating our layout, and then we set up an array list, which holds all of our models. We created a constructor to get the values for these variables. And then we have these 3 methods, right? So we have the onCreateViewHolder, which is essentially giving the layout for each of our rows. The onBindViewHolder, which is going to change the data based on the RecyclerView's position for each of our items. We have the getItemCount. RecyclerView just wants to know how much data we have to display to the user. And then finally, we created this inner class, which is pretty much like the onCreate. All right, so our adapter is done. We're about 99% of the way there. This is probably the hardest part. So let's go back over to our main activity, because what we have to do now is attach our adapter to our RecyclerView, and that's it. Pretty simple stuff. So what did I call my RecyclerView here? So I called it my RecyclerView. So I'm going to copy this ID because we need to pull it into our Java code. So let's go back over to our main activity. In the onCreate, what I want to do is go RecyclerView. Our RecyclerView is going to equal the usual find view by ID. That's our r.id. Whatever you called your RecyclerView. So I have this guy, our RecyclerView, stored in this variable here. And then what you need to do now, please don't make this mistake, is create the adapter after you set up your models. Because our adapter, we pass in our model list right here. If you set it up before you actually create all of your models, you're just passing in an empty array list and nothing's going to show up. So let's come past the setup method. And what we're going to do is call our amino acid RecyclerView Adapter. We're just going to call this adapter. And then we're going to set this equal to a new amino acid RecyclerView Adapter, and we have to pass in our context. So this followed by the amino acid models. Remember, we created our adapter after we set up our models. So now that we have our adapter, we need to attach it to our RecyclerView. We could do this by typing in RecyclerView.setAdapter, and we just pass in our adapter. And one last thing, RecyclerView.setLayoutManager to a new linear layout manager, and we're just going to pass in this. And that should be everything you need for the RecyclerView. So assuming I didn't make any weird mistakes, I'm going to change this to the Pixel 4, run it, and let's see what we get. Ah, I forgot. Okay, cool. So if you remember back to the beginning of this video, I said I left out one part in the RecyclerView row.xml file. Well, this is what I left out. I didn't wrap the content for both of our constraints, and we get something that looks like this. It can be very difficult to debug because it looks like you have everything right, but it's just the spacing. So we're going to close out of this, and I'm going to show you how to fix this issue. So going back over to the RecyclerView.row, what we need to do is in the outermost constraint layout, we need to change this layout height to wrap content. And we also need to change the CardView height to wrap content as well, and it's already wrap content. Cool. So you only have to change this one. This item view should snap up towards the top, and then we're going to rerun this, and we should be good to go. That's what we were looking for. So don't forget to do that. Very common mistake, but everything else is looking good, I think. All right, so that's all I have for you guys. I hope you guys really enjoyed this video. I put a lot of time into it. As always, if you guys have any questions or if you're just having trouble getting something to work, leave a comment down below. I'd be more than happy to help you guys out. or you could join the Discord server that I set up for this channel. Link to that down in the description as well. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.